exercise today. I completed 20,000 steps. Um, that's like my daily exercise, is trying to get as many steps in a day as I can. And today I did 20,000. But that's not the point of the story today. For the live stream. Today we are digging into Vlad the Impaler. If you know who Vlad the Impaler is, the guy was brutal and very graphic and gory when it comes to his leadership of the country he was from. Vlad the Impaler was born Vlad was born Vlad, but they've had other names for him. Um, he was born as Vlad the Third, commonly known as Vlad the Impaler or Vlad Dracula or Vlad Dracula. Was born between the years 1428 and 1431. Nobody knows for sure what year exactly he was born, and he was a voivode of Wakalia 3 times between the years of 1448 and up until his death between the years of 1476 and 1477. And voivode is a term in Romania that means general or warlord, and that was the term that they used back for the military for them back then. Um, um, he's often considered to be one of the most important rulers in Wakalian history and the national hero of Romania. Um, he was the second son of Vlad Dracul, who became the ruler of Wakalia in 1436. Um, Now, Vlad and his younger brother Radu were held as hostages in the Ottoman Empire in 1442 to secure their father's loyalty. Vlad's eldest brother, Mircea, and their father were murdered after John Hunyadi, a regent governor of Hungary, invaded Wakalia in 1447. Now, Hunyadi installed Vlad's second cousin, Vladislav II, as the new voivode. Um, Hunyadi launched a military campaign against the Ottomans in the autumn of 1448, and Vladislav accompanied him. Now, Vlad broke into Wakalia with Ottoman support in October, but Vladislav returned, and Vlad sought refuge in the Ottoman Empire before the end of the year. Vlad went to Moldavia in 1449 or 1450, and later went on to Hungary. Now, relations between Hungary and Vladislav later deteriorated. And in 1456, Vlad invaded Wakalia with Hungarian support. Now, Vladislav died fighting against him, but Vlad began a purge among the Wakalian warriors to strengthen his position. He came into conflict with the Transylvanian Saxons, who supported his opponents. Now, Dan and not much here. That's Jackson joining in. Good to see that. Now Dan and Basarab, who were Vladislav's brothers, and Vlad's illegitimate half brother, another Vlad, because basically Vlad was a popular name back in Romania. Vlad plundered into Saxon villages, taking the captured people to Wakalia, and where he had them impaled, which inspired his epithet. Peace was restored in 1460. Yeah, I passed my class yesterday for college. Basically, I'm taking plant engineering classes for through UPS, and they're paying me to take as long as I maintain my CA grade average. I passed with an 82%, which is not bad. That's a B, so it's still good for passing. Now, the Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, ordered Vlad to pay homage to him personally, but Vlad had the Sultan's 2 envoys captured and impaled. In February of 1462, he attacked the Ottoman territory, massacring tens of thousands of Turkish and Muslim Bulgarians. Now, Mehmed had launched Mehmed launched a campaign against Wakalia to replace Vlad with Vlad's younger brother Radu. Now, Vlad attempted to capture the Sultan at Targovist, um, during the nights of the 16th and 17th of June of 1462. Now the Sultan and the main Ottoman army left Wakalia, but more and more Wakalians deserted to Radu. Now Vlad went to Transylvania to seek assistance from Matthias Corvinus, who was the king of Hungary at that time, in late 1462, but Corvinus had him imprisoned. Um, Now Vlad was held in captivity in Visograd from 1463 to 1475. During this time period, anecdotes about his cruelty started to spread in Germany and Italy. He was released at the request of Stephen III of Moldavia in the summer of 1475. Now he fought in Corvinus's army against the Ottomans in Bosnia in early 1476, but Hungarian and Moldavian troops helped him to force Basarab, who had dethroned Vlad's brother Radu, to flee from Wakalia in November. Now, Basarab returned with Ottoman support before the end of the year, and Vlad was killed in battle before January 10th of 1477. Um, now, um, there have been many books describing Vlad's cruel acts, and they were among the first bestsellers in the German-speaking territories. Now, in Russia, popular stories suggested that Vlad was able to strengthen his central government only by applying brutal punishment, and many 19th century Romanian historians adopted a similar view. Vlad's patronymic inspired the name of Bram Stoker's literary vampire Count Dracula. And Count Dracula, is a very popular thing, and I did a video, I think, of that last week about the vampires. Um, the name Dracula, which is now primarily known as the name of a vampire, was for centuries known as the sub of Vlad III. Diplomatic reports and popular stories referred to him as Dracula, um, um, Dracula, or Dracula, spelt with either, it can be spelt with a Dracula or Dracula. That's Dracula, the proper spelling for the English term. Or you got Dracula spelled Dra, or that could be spelled Dracula, which is kind of the same thing, and that was back in the 15th century. Now, he himself signed his two letters as Dracula in the late 1470s. His name had its origin from his father, Vlad Dracul, meaning Vlad the Dragon in medieval Romanian times. And he received it after he became a member of the Order of the Dragon. Dracula is the Slavonic genitive form of Dracul, meaning the son of Dracul, or the dragon. In modern Romania, Dracul means the devil, which contributed to Vlad's reputation. Um, now, Vlad III is known as Vlad Tepes, or Vlad the Impaler in Romanian historiography. This is connected to the impalement. That was his favorite method of execution. The Ottoman writer Tursun Beg referred to him as Kazaki Voivoda, which means Impaler of the Lord. Around 1500, Mercia the shepherd, who was a voivode of Wakalia, used this reference when referring to Vlad III in a letter of grant on April 1st of 1551. Um, now Vlad, um, Vlad was the second legitimate son of Vlad II Dracul, who was himself an illegitimate son of Mercia, one of Wakalia. Um, Vlad II had won the moniker Dracul for his membership in the Order of the Dragon, a militant fraternity founded by Sigismund of Luxembourg, who was the king of Hungary. The Order of the Dragon was dedicated to halting the Ottoman advance in Europe. Since he was old enough to be candidate for the throne of Wakalia in 1448, Vlad's time of birth would have been born. He would have to have been born between 1428 and 1431, but nobody knows for sure. Um, Now, Vlad was most probably born after his father settled in Transylvania in 1429. Historian Radu writes that Vlad was born in the Transylvanian Saxon town of the Transylvanian town of Sigasora, which was then a kingdom in Hungary, where his father lived in a three story house from 1431 to 1435. Modern historians identify Vlad's mother either as a daughter or kinswoman of Alexander I of Moldavia, or as his father's unknown first wife. Um, Vlad II seized Wakalia after the death of his half brother Alexander Aldia in 1436. Now, one of his charters, which was issued on January 20th of 1437, preserves the first reference to Vlad III and his elder brother Mercia, mentioning them as their father's firstborn sons, and they were mentioned in four further documents between the year 1437 and 1439. And the last of the four charters also refers to their younger brother Radu. Um, Now, after a meeting with John Hunyadi, who was a voivode of Transylvania, Vlad Dracul II did not support an Ottoman invasion of Transylvania in March of 1442. The Ottoman Sultan Murad II ordered him to come to Gallipoli to demonstrate his loyalty. Um, Now, Vlad and Radu accompanied their father to the Ottoman Empire, where they were all imprisoned and jailed. Now, Vlad Dracul was released before the end of the year, but Vlad and Radu remained hostages to secure his loyalty. And they were held imprisoned in the fortress of Egrogaz, amid according to contemporaneous Ottoman chronicles. Um, Now their lives were especially in danger after their father supported Vladislaus, who was the king of Poland and Hungary, against the Ottoman Empire during the Crusade of Varna in 1444. Um, Vlad Dracul II was convinced that his two sons would be butchered for the sake of Christian peace, but neither Vlad nor Radu were murdered um, or mutilated after their father had rebelled. Um, Now Vlad Dracul again acknowledged the um, Sultan's suzerainty, which I'm not sure what that means. The word is highlighted here, but obviously I don't know. And they promised to pay a yearly tribute to him in 1446 or 1447. Though John Hunyadi, who had by then become the regent governor of Hungary in 1446, invaded Wakalia in November of 1447. Um, the Byzantine historian Michael Craigtobolus had wrote that Vlad and Radu fled to the Ottoman Empire, which suggested that the Sultan had allowed them to return to Wakalia after their father paid homage to him. Um, Now, Vlad Dracul and his eldest son Mercia were murdered, but Hunyadi made Vladislav II, son of Vlad Dracul's cousin Dan II, the ruler of Wakalia. Um, Now, upon the death of his father and older brother, Vlad III became a potential claimant to Wakalia. The Vladislav II of Wakalia accompanied John Hunyadi, who launched a campaign against the Ottoman Empire in September of 1448. Taking advantage of his opponent's absence, Vlad broke into Wakalia at the head of an Ottoman army in early October. He had to accept that the Ottomans had captured the fortress on the Danube and strengthened it. Um, Now, the Ottomans defeated Hunyadi's army in the Battle of Kosovo between October 17th and October 18th. Um, Hunyadi's deputy Nicholas Bizagnaki had urged Vlad to come to meet him in Transylvania, but Vlad III refused to meet him. Now, Vladislav II returned to Wakalia at the head of the remnants of his army. But Vlad was forced to flee to the Ottoman Empire by December 7th of 1448. Um, Now, there's a letter written here. We bring you the news that Nicholas Bizanaki writes to us and asks us to be so kind as to come to him until John Hunyadi returns from the war, but we were unable to do this because an emissary from Nicopolis came to us and said with great certainty that Murad II had defeated Hunyadi. Now, if we come to Bizanaki, now the Ottomans could come and kill both of you and us, but therefore we ask you to have patience until we see what happened. Um, and it goes from there. Now a lot of times it wasn't uncommon for people to be exiled from rebellion. Now Vladimir was exiled from his country because he refused to support certain people. That's not uncommon. Now Vlad first settled in the Ottoman Empire after his first downfall. Not long after, he moved to Moldavia, where Bogdan II, his father's brother-in-law and possibly his maternal uncle, had mounted the throne with John Hunyadi's support in the autumn of 1449. Now, after Bogdan was murdered by Peter the Third by Peter Aaron III in October of 1451, Bogdan's son Stephen fled to Transylvania with Vlad to seek assistance from Hunyadi. Now, however, Hunyadi had concluded a 3-year truce with the Ottoman Empire on November 20th of 1451, acknowledging the Wakalian warrior's right to elect a successor of Vladimir II if he died. Um, Vlad III had allegedly wanted to settle in Brasov, which was the center of the Wakalian warriors expelled by Vladislav II. But Hunyadi forbade the burghers to give shelter to him on February 6th of 1452. Um, Vlad returned to Moldavia, where Alexandrul had dethroned Peter Aaron. The events of his life during the years that followed are unknown, but he must have returned to Hungary before July 3rd of 1456 because on that day, Hunyadi informed the townspeople of Brasov that he had tasked Vlad with the defense of the Transylvanian border. Um, his second role, the circumstances and the dates of Vlad's return to Wakalia are not certain. Um, he invaded Wakalia with Hungarian support either in April or July or August of 1456. So one of those 3 months he took control. Vladislav II died during the invasion, but Vlad sent his first exant letter as voivode of Wakalia to the burghers of Brasov on September 10th of that year. Of 1456, he promised to protect them in case of an Ottoman invasion of Transylvania, but he also sought their assistance if the Ottomans occupied Wakalia. In the same letter, he stated that when a man or a prince is strong and powerful, he can make peace as he wants to, but when he is weak, a stronger one will come and do what he wants him, showing his authoritarian personality. Um, multiple sources, um, multiple sources, including Laonikos, Chalco Condyle's chronicle, recorded that hundreds of thousands of people were executed at Vlad's order at the beginning of his reign. He began a purge against the boyars who had participated in the murder of his father and elder brother, or whom he suspected of plotting against him. Um, Now, Chalco Condyles stated that Vlad quickly effected a great change and utterly revolutionized the affairs of Wakalia through granting the money, property, and other goods of his victims to his retainers. Um, Now, this, excuse me. Now, the list of the members of the princely council during Vlad's reign also shows that only two of them, um, and that two of them basically were able to retain their positions between the year 1457 and 1461. Now, conflict with the Saxons. Saxons were a common thing back then too. Now, Vlad sent the customary tribute to the Sultan. After John Hunyadi died on August 11th of 1456, his elder son Vladislaus Hunyadi became the captain general of Hungary. Um, He accused Vlad of having no intention of remaining faithful to the King of Hungary in a letter to the burghers of Brussels, also ordering them to support Vladislav Vladislav II's brother Dan III against Vlad. Um, the burghers of Sibiu had supported another pretender, a priest of the Romanians who calls himself a prince's son. The latter, identified as Vlad's illegitimate brother, Vlad Kalugurl, took possession of Amlus, which had customarily been held by the rulers of Wakalia and Transylvania. Um, Ladislaus V of Hungary had Ladislaus Hunyadi executed on March 16th of 1457. Um, now, Hunyadi's mother Elizabeth and her brother Michael stirred up a rebellion against the king, which was not uncommon back then for people to do. If you didn't like a certain king, if you didn't like a certain king's position, you could rebel, but it doesn't mean that you were going to survive it either way. Um, Taking advantage of the civil war in Hungary, Vlad assisted Stephen, son of Bogdan III, sorry, the son of Bogdan II of Moldavia, in his move to seize Moldavia in June of 1457. Now, Vlad also broke into Transylvania and plundered the villages around Brasov and Sibiu. The earliest German stories about Vlad had recounted that he had carried men, women, children from a Saxon village to Wakalia and had them impaled. Um, since the Transylvanian Saxons remained loyal to their king, Vlad's attack against them strengthened the position of that particular country and town. Um, Now, not much. Um, Marcus, we're doing pretty good here. Um, Now, Vladislaus Hunyadi's younger brother, Matthias Corvinus, was elected king of Hungary on January 24th of 1458, but he ordered the burghers of Sibiu to keep the peace with Vlad on March 3rd. Um, Vlad styled himself lord and ruler over all of Wakalia and the duchies of Amlus and Fagaris on September 20th of 1459. Now, basically, on September 20th of 1459, it showed that he had taken possession of both of these traditional Transylvanian fiefs, or fiefs of the rulers of Wakalia. Now, the guy Michael allowed the other boyar Michael, the official of Vladislav II of Wakalia, and other Wakalian boyars to settle in Transylvania in late March of 1458. And before long, Vlad had the boyar Michael killed. In May, Vlad asked the burghers of Brasov to send craftsmen to Wakalia, but his relationships with the Saxons had deteriorated before the end of the year. Now, according to a scholarly theory, the conflict emerged after Vlad forbade the Saxons to enter Wakalia, forced to sell their goods to Wakalian merchants at a compulsory border fairs. Vlad's protectionist tendencies or border fairs are not documented, but instead, in 1476, Vlad emphasized that he had always promoted free trade during his reign. Um, Now, Saxons confiscated the steel that a Wakalian merchant had bought in Brasov without repaying the price to him. In response, Vlad ransacked and tortured some Saxon merchants, according to a letter that Basarab, a son of Dan II of Wakalia, wrote on January 21st of 1459. Now, Basarab had settled in Sighasoria and laid claim to Wakalia. However, Matthias Corvinus supported Dan III, who was again in Brasov against Vlad, and Dan III stated that Vlad had Saxon merchants and their children impaled or burnt alive in Wakalia. Um, Here's a letter that was written to the counselors of Rasalb and Tero on Barsay, written by Basarab. Now Basarab wrote this letter. You know that King Matthias has sent me, and when I came to Tara Barsay, the officials and the counselors of Brasob and the old men of Tara Barsay cried to us with broken hearts about the things which Vlad, our enemy, did. How he did not remain faithful to our lord the king and has sided with the Ottomans. He captured all the merchants of Brasob and Tara Barsay who had gone in peace to Wakalia, and took all their wealth. But he was not satisfied only with the wealth of these people, but he imprisoned them and impaled them, 41 in all. Nor were these people enough. He became even more evil and gathered 300 boys from Brasob and Tara Barsay that he found in Wakalia. Of these he impaled some and burned others. Um, Now Dan III broke into Wakalia, but Vlad defeated and executed him on April 22nd of 1460. Now Vlad III invaded southern Transylvania, and he destroyed the suburbs of Brasov, ordering the impalement of all men and women who had been captured there. Um, During the ensuing negotiations, Vlad III demanded the expulsion or punishment of all Bukalian refugees from. Peace had been restored before July 26 of 1460, but when Vlad had addressed the burghers of Rosalb as his brothers and friends, Vlad invaded the region of Ramlas and Fagaras on August 24th to punish the local inhabitants who had supported Dan III. Um, Constantine, um, a guy named Constantine who had served as a janissary in the Sultan's army, had recorded that Vlad III refused to pay homage to the Sultan in an unspecified year. Now, the Renaissance historian Giovanni Angi- Angi- Angioli likewise wrote that Vlad had failed to pay tribute to the Sultan for 3 years, if not longer. Now, both records suggest that Vlad ignored the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II back in 1459, but both works were written decades after the events. Now, Tursenbeg, a secretary in the Sultan's court, stated that Vlad III had only turned against the Ottoman Empire when the Sultan was away on the long expedition to Trebizond in 1461. Um, According to Tursenbeg, Vlad stated that new negotiations with Matthias Corvinus, but the Sultan was soon informed by his spies. Everybody had spies back then. Mehmed sent his envoy, the Greek Thomas Catamolinus, also known as Yunus Bey, to Wakalia, ordering Vlad to come to Constantinople. He also sent secret instructions to Hamza, who was the Bey of Nicopolis, to capture Vlad after he crossed the Danube. But Vlad found out the Sultan's deceit and trickery, and he captured Hamza. But he captured So Vlad found out that he was being tricked, and he was able to capture Hamza and Catamolinus and had them executed. Now after the execution of the Ottoman officials, Vladimir Vlad Vlad the Third gave orders in fluent Turkish to the commander of the fortress of Georgi to open the gates, enabling the Wakalian soldiers to break into the fortress and capture it. Now, now Vlad invaded the Ottoman Empire, devastating the villages along the Danube. He informs Matthias Corvinus about the military action in a letter on February 11th of 1462, and he stated that more than 23,884 Turks and Bulgarians had been killed under his order during his campaign. He sought military assistance from Corvinus, declaring that he had broken the peace with the Sultan for the honor of the king and the Holy Crown of Hungary, and for the preservation um, of Christianity and the strengthening of the Catholic faith. The relationship between Moldavia and Wakalia had become tense by 1462, according to the letter of the Genoese governor of Kappa. Now, having learned of Vlad's invasion, Mehmed II raised an army of more than 450,000 strong, that was said to be second in size only to the one that occupied Constantinople in 1453. Now, according to Chalco condyles. The size of the army suggests that the Sultan wanted to occupy Wakalia, according to a number of historians, including Franz Babinger, Radu Floresco, and Nicolae Escu. On the other hand, Mehmed had granted Wakalia to Vlad's brother Radu before the invasion of Wakalia, showing that the Sultan's principal purpose was the only change of the ruler of Wakalia. Now, the Ottoman fleet landed at Broila, which was the only one second here. The main Ottoman Empire crossed the Danube under the command of the Sultan at Nikopol, Bulgaria, on June 4th of 1462. Now, outnumbered by the enemy, Vlad adopted a scorched earth policy and retreated towards Targovis during the night of June 16th and 17th. But Vlad broke into the Ottoman camp in an attempt to capture or kill the Sultan. Either the imprisonment or the death of the Sultan would have caused panic among the Ottoman Empire, but it would have enabled Vlad to defeat the Ottoman army. However, the Wakalians had missed the court of the Sultan himself and attacked the tents of the viziers Mahmud Pasha and Isaac. Having failed to attack the Sultan's camp, Vlad and his retainers left the Ottoman camp at dawn, but Mehmed entered Targovis at the end of June, and the towns had been deserted. But the Ottomans were horrified to discover a forest of the impaled, thousands of stakes with the carcass of the executed people, according to Chalcondyles. Now, the Sultan's army entered into the area of the impalements, which was 17 stages long and 7 stages wide. There were large stakes there on which, as it was said, about 20,000 men, women, and children had been spitted. Basically quite a sight for the Turks and the Sultan himself. But the Sultan was seized with amazement and said that it was not possible to deprive of his country a man who had done such great deeds, who had such a diabolical understanding of how to govern his realm and its people. And he said that a man who had done such things was worth much. And the rest of the Turks were dumbfounded when they saw the multitude of men on the stakes. But there were infants too affixed to their mothers on the stakes, and birds had made their nest in their entrails. Now, God, I think I might have went too far down. Hold on. Okay. Tursun Beg had recorded that the Ottomans suffered from the summer heat and thirst during the campaign. Now the Sultan decided to retreat from Makalia, and he marched towards Brela. Stephen III of Moldavia hurried to Chilia, which is a part of Ukraine, to seize the important fortress where a Hungarian garrison had been placed. Vlad also departed for Chilia, but left behind a troop of 6,000 strong to try to hinder the march of the Sultan army. But the Ottomans defeated the Wakalians. Stephen of Moldavia was wounded during the siege of Chilia and returned to Moldavia before Vlad III came to the fortress. The main Ottoman army left Wakalia, but Vlad's brother Radu and his Ottoman troops stayed behind in the Baragan plain. Radu sent messages to the Wakalians, reminding them that the Sultan could again invade their country. Although Vlad defeated Radu and his Ottoman allies in 2 battles during the following months, more and more Wakalians deserted to Radu. Vlad withdrew to the Carpathian Mountains, hoping that Matthias Corvinus would help him regain his throne. Which I don't think it ever happened. But however, Albert of Istamezzo, the deputy of the Count of the Siskels, the Dicelius, had recommended in mid-August that the Saxons recognize Radu. Radu also made an offer to the burghers of Brasov to confirm their commercial privileges and paid them a compensation of 15,000 ducats. I'm not sure what ducats are. That might be their form of payment. During Vlad III's time and reign, he was imprisoned in Hungary. Matthias Corvinus came to Transylvania in November of 1462. Now, the negotiations between Corvinus and Vlad lasted for weeks. Not for sure exactly how many weeks, but for some weeks. But Corvinus did not want to wage war against the Ottoman Empire, but at the king's order, his Czech mercenary commander John Jiskra of Brandes had captured Vlad near Wakar in Wakalia. Um, and to provide an explanation for Vlad's imprisonment to Pope Pius II and the Venetians, who had sent money to finance a campaign against the Ottoman Empire, um, Corvinus presented three letters allegedly written by Vlad III on November 7th, 1462, to Mehmed II, Mahmud Pasha, and Stephen of Moldavia. According to the letters, Vlad had offered to join the forces with the Sultan's army against Hungary if the Sultan restored him to his throne. Most historians, yes, I do remember that. Um, yeah, I do remember that FR Sharpie. I remember you saying something about you had subscribed about a couple of weeks ago when I did one of my live streams. Um, Most historians agree that the documents were forged to give grounds for Vlad's imprisonment. Now, Corvinus's court historian Antonio Bonfini had admitted that the reason for Vlad's imprisonment was never clarified, but Florescu's writes that the style of writing, the rhetoric of meek submission hardly compatible with what we know of Dracula's character, clumsy wording, and poor Latin are all evidence that the letters could not be written on Vlad's order, but he associates the author of the forgery with the Saxon priest of Brasov. Um, Vlad III was first imprisoned in the city of Belgrade, which is now Alba Iulia in Romania, according to Chalco Condiles. Before long, he was taken to Visograd, where he was held for 14 years, but no documents referring to Vlad between 1462 and 1475 have ever been preserved. Basically, they've all been lost. Um, in the summer of 1475, Stephen III of Moldavia sent his envoys to Matthias Corvinus, asking him to send Vlad to Wakalia against Basarab Leotoya, who had submitted himself to the Ottomans. Now, Stephen wanted to secure Wakalia for a ruler who had been an enemy of the Ottoman Empire, because the Wakalians were like the Turks to the Moldavians, according to this letter. According to the Slavic stories about Vlad, he was only released after he converted to Catholicism, basically. Um, no, Matthias Corvinus recognized Vlad as the lawful prince of Wakalia, but he did not provide him with any military assistance to regain his principality. Um, Vlad settled in a house in Pass, but when a group of soldiers broke into the house while pursuing a thief who had tried to hide there, Vlad had their commander executed because they had not asked his permission before entering his home, according to the Slavic stories about his life. Now, Vlad would up and move to Transylvania in June of 1475. He wanted to settle in Sibiu, but he sent his envoy to the town in early June to arrange a house for him. Ahmed II acknowledged Basarab Loyotoyo as the lawful ruler of Wakalia. Corvinus ordered the burghers of Sibiu to give 200 gold florins to Vlad from the royal revenues on September 21st, while Vlad left Transylvania for Buda in October. Um, Vlad would eventually buy a house in Pax that became known as Dracula House, which means Dracula's house in Hungarian. In January of 1476, John Pongrek of Dengelberg, who was a voivode of Transylvania, urged the people of Brasov to send to Vlad all those of his supporters who had settled in the town because Corvinus and Basarab had concluded a treaty. Hello, editor. Everything NBA. Speaking of NBA, I've been watching some of the games from. I've actually been following the games for basketball. I saw Golden State lost. Was not happy about that one, but they got some good lineups for basketball this year. Don't know who's going to take it. Who's going to take the title this year for basketball? Um, So the relationship between the Transylvanian Saxons and Basarab remained tense, and the Saxons gave shelter to Basarab's opponents during the following months. Now Carbinus, um, I'm a Chicago Bulls fan. I grew up in Chicago, so I grew up watching the Bulls. Um, and then for baseball, I'm a Cubs fan. My Cubs did drop 2 games against the San Francisco Giants. Not really happy about that one. Um, now, now Carbinus dispatched Vlad and the Serbian Vuk um, Gu, Rebic to the two fights against the Ottomans in Bosnia in early 1476. Now they captured um, uh, Mabrentsica and other fortresses in February and March of 1476, but in the Bosnian campaign, Vlad once again who resorted to his terror tactics, mass impaling, captured Turkish soldiers, and massacring civilians in consequent settlements, and conquered settlements basically. His troops mostly had destroyed Kozlot and Zavornik. Um, Now Mehmed II invaded Moldavia and defeated Stephen III in the Battle of Balia Alba on July 26th of 1476. Now Stephen Bathory and Vlad entered Moldavia, forcing the Sultan to lift the siege of the fortress of Targo Niamt in late August of that year. Now, according to the letter of Matthias Corvinus, the contemporaries of Jakub Unrest added that Vuk, being VUK, Gur Gurabich, and a member of the noble Jaksic family also participated in the struggle against the Ottomans in Moldavia. Um, now, Now Matthias Corvinus ordered the Transylvanian Saxons to support Bathory's planned invasion of Wakalia on September 6th of 1476. Now they mentioned a guy named Bathory, but the only Bathory I know is Elizabeth Bathory, just by name anyway, and the stories that I heard about her. Um, I think Elizabeth Bathory was the woman who did not like looking at her photo. She did not like looking at her reflection, and she would have these people killed, and she would bathe in their blood because she believed and maintained her youth, which not the case. She ordered a whole bunch of people killed so that she could bathe and drink in their blood, and she believed in her mind that it kept her young, and so again she would refuse to have mirrors in her home because she didn't want to look at herself getting any older. Um, so Matthias Corvinus ordered the Transylvanian Saxons to support Bathory's planned invasion of Wakalia on September 6th of 1476. Also informing them that Stephen of Moldavia would also invade Wakalia. But Vlad stayed in Brasov and confirmed that the commercial privileges of the local burghers in Wakalia on October 7th of 1476. Bathory's forces captured Targovist on November 8th. Stephen of Moldavia and Vlad ceremoniously confirmed their alliance, and they occupied Bucharest, forcing Basarab to seek refuge in the Ottoman Empire on November 16th. Vlad informed the merchants of Brasov about his victory, urging them to come to Wakalia. He was crowned before November 26th of that year. Now Basarab returned to Wakalia with Ottoman support, and Vlad died fighting against them in late December 1476 or possibly early January of 1477. Nobody knows for sure. But in a letter written on January 10th of 1477, Stephen III of Moldavia related that Vlad's Moldavian retinue had also been massacred. According to the most reliable source, Vlad's army of about 2,000 was cornered and destroyed by a Turkish Basarab force of 4,000 near Snagov. The exact circumstances of his death are unclear. Nobody knows how he had died in the war, but he died. Um, Now, according to the most reliable sources that we know of, um, Vlad's army of about 2,000 was cornered and destroyed by a Turkish Vassarov force of 4,000 near Snagov. The exact circumstances of his death are unclear, but the Austrian chronicler Jacob Unrest stated that a disguised Turkish assassin had murdered Vlad in his camp. In contrast, Russian statement Fyodor, who interviewed Vlad's family after his demise, reported that the Voivode was mistaken for a Turk by his own troops during battle, causing them to attack him and kill him. Um, Florescu and Raymond McNally had commented that this accounts by noting that Vlad had often disguised himself as a Turkish soldier as a part of military ruses. Now, according to Leonardo Bada, the Milanese ambassador to Buda, the Ottomans cut Vlad's corpse into pieces, kind of like what they did with William Wallace in Scotland. They kind of did the same thing by cutting his body into pieces. Bonfini wrote that Vlad's head was sent to Mehmed II. It was eventually placed on a high stake in Constantinople. His severed head allegedly was displayed and buried in the Voivode Street, today known as Bankalar Kadasi and Karakoy. It is rumored that Voivode Hamhan, located on Bankalar Kadasi number 19, was the last stop of Vlad Tepes' skull. Local peasant traditions maintain that what was left of Vlad's corpse was later discovered in the marshes of Snagov by monks from a nearby monastery. The place of his burial is not known, but according to popular tradition, which was first recorded in the late 19th century, Vlad was buried in a monastery of Snagov. However, the excavations carried out by Danu V. Rossetti in 1933 found no tomb below the supposed unmarked tombstone of Vlad in the monastery church, but Rossetti reported under the tombstone attributed to Vlad there was no tomb, only bones and jaws of horses. Historian Constantine Reza Shabishi had said that Vlad was most probably buried in the first church of the Kamana Monastery, which has been established by Vlad and was near the battlefield where he was killed. Supposedly he could be buried there, but nobody knows. Now, when it comes to Vlad had two wives, according to modern specialists. His first wife may have been the illegitimate daughter of John Hunyadi, according to historian Alexandru Simon. Vlad's second wife was Justina, who was a cousin of Matthias Corvinus. She was the widow of Wenzel Pangrag when Ladislaus Dragwola married her, most probably in 1475, but she survived Vladimir Cole and married thirdly Paul Suki, who was then Janus Erdeli. Vlad had a son named Minia, who was born in the year 1462. Vlad had an unnamed second son who was killed in 1486, while Vlad's third son, Vlad Dracuila, unsuccessfully laid claim to Bacali around 1495, and he was the forefather of the noble Dracuila family. Now, as we all know from history, Vlad had a cruelty and a reputation for cruelty. Now, stories about Vlad's brutal acts began circulating during his lifetime. After his arrest, the courtiers of Matthias Corvinus promoted their spread. The papal legate, Niccolo, had already written about such stories to Pope Pius II in 1462. 2 years later, the Pope included them in his commentaries. Now, speaking of Pope, they just elected a new one. I didn't catch his name. I didn't catch the new Pope's name that they elected. But we just got a new Pope. I don't know if somebody told me somebody said he was from the Chicagoland area, but I don't know if that's true or not. It was even rumored that Vlad once dipped his bread into the blood of his impaled victims, but this so far remains legendary, as the story has never been confirmed. Michael Beheim wrote a lengthy poem about Vlad III's deeds. Allegedly, it was based on his conversation with a Catholic monk who had managed to escape from Vlad's prison. Now, the poem, called Von Einem, which means a story of a despot called Dracula, devoid of Wakalia, was performed in the court of Frederick III, Holy Roman Emperor, and during the winter in the winter of 1463. Um, Now, according to one of Beham's stories, Vlad had two monks impaled to assist him to go to heaven, also ordering the impalement of their donkey because it began braying after their master's death. Beham also accused Vlad of duplicity, stating that Vlad had promised to support both Matthias Corvinus and Mehmed II, but did not keep any of the promises. Um, in 1475, Gabriel Mangoni, who was a bishop of Eger and a former papal legate, understood that Vlad had been in prison because of his cruelty, but Mangoni also recorded the rumor that while in prison, Vlad caught rats to cut them up into pieces or stuck them on small pieces of wood because he was unable to forget his wickedness. Antonio Bonfini also recorded anecdotes about Vlad in his Historia Panonica around 1495. Bonfini wanted to justify both the removal and the restoration of Vlad by Matthias, but he described Vlad as a man of unheard cruelty and justice. Bonfini's stories about Vlad were repeated in Sebastian Munster's Cosmography. Munster also recorded Vlad's reputation for tyrannical justice. Um, Now, Turkish messengers came to Vlad to pay their respects, but refused to take off their turbans according to their ancient custom. Whereupon he strengthened their custom by nailing their turbans to their heads with 3 spikes so that they could not take them off. Works containing the stories about Vlad's cruelty were published in Low German in the Holy Roman Empire in 1480, or probably before then. Um, the stories were allegedly written in the early 1460s because they describe Vlad's campaign across the Danube in early 1462, but they do not refer to Mehmed II's invasion of Mokalia in June of that same year. They provide a detailed narration of the conflicts between Vlad and the Transylvanian Saxons, showing that they originated in the literary minds of the Saxons. Um, the stories about Vlad's plundering and raids in Transylvania were clearly based on eyewitness accounts because they contain accurate details, including the list of the churches destroyed by Vlad and the dates of the raids. They describe Vlad as a demented psychopath, a sadist, a gruesome murderer, a masochist, worse than Caligula and Nero. Those are going to be 2 people I would probably do videos on too, Caligula and Nero, and they were brutal themselves. However, the stories emphasizing Vlad's cruelty are to be treated with caution because his brutal acts were probably exaggerated or even invented by the Saxons themselves. The invention of the movable type printing contributed to the popularity of the stories about Vlad, making them one of the first bestsellers in Europe. To enhance sales, they were published in books with woodcuts on their title pages that depicted horrific scenes. Now, for instance, the editions published in Nuremberg in 1499 and Strasbourg in 1500 depict Vlad dining at a table surrounded by dead or dying people on poles. Now, supposedly, Vlad had a big copper cauldron built and put a lid made of wood with holes in it on top. He put the people in the cauldron and put their heads in the holes and fastened them there. Then he filled it with boiling hot water and set a fire under it and let the people cry their eyes out until they were boiled to death. And then he invented frightening, terrible, unheard of tortures. Back then, nobody knew what lengths he would go to. He ordered that men would be impaled together with their suckling babies on the same stake. The babies fought for their lives at their mother's breast until they died. Then he had the woman's breast cut off and put the babies inside head first. Thus, he had them impaled together. Now, supposedly, there are more than 20 manuscripts written between the 15th and 18th century, which preserve the text of the Skazini or of Dracul Bavoid, the tale about Bavoid Dracula. The manuscripts were written in Russian, but they copied a text that had originally been recorded in South-Slavic language because they contain expressions alien to the Russian language, but they were used in South-Slavic idioms, such as diable for evil. The original text was written in Buda between 1482 and 1486. the 19 anecdotes in the Skazany are longer than the German stories about Vlad. They are a mixture of fact and fiction, according to historian Raymond T. McNally. Now, almost half of the anecdotes emphasize, like the German stories, Vlad's brutality, but they also undermine that his cruelty enabled him to strengthen the central government in Wakalia. Now, for instance, the Skazany rates of golden cup that nobody dared to steal at a fountain because Vlad hated stealing so violently that anybody who caused an evil or robbery did not live long because thereby promoting the public order. And the German story about Vlad's campaign against Ottoman territory underlined his cruel acts, while the Skazany emphasized his successful diplomacy. Now, calling him Slomudri or evil wise. On the other hand, the Skazanese sharply criticized Vlad for his conversion to Catholicism, attributing his death to this apostasy. Now, some elements of the anecdotes were later added to Russian stories about Ivan the Terrible of Russia, and he's another guy I want to get to. I learned to read fast. Now, assertion by modern standards, the mass murders that Vlad carried out indiscriminately and brutally would most likely amount to acts of genocide and war crimes by current standards. Um, Now, Romanian Defense Minister Ion Mircea Pascu asserted that Vlad would have been condemned for crimes against humanity had he been put on trial at Nuremberg. Um, Now, according to research published in 2023 based on the analysis of samples collected from letters written by Vlad, he may have had a rare condition known as um, hemolacria, which causes a person's tears to be partially composed of blood. Um, we're talking about Vlad the Impaler. Now, and Vlad the Impaler was pretty fucking brutal, I can tell you that. The way he would kill people by impaling them on spikes. Now, some people would consider Vlad a national hero, but I don't know about that. That depends on how you look at it. Um, now, the Canto Casino Chronicle was the first Romanian historical work to record a tale. Yeah, I'll probably do some. I'll probably do some videos about war. I'll probably will put up some live stream videos about the war too, like World War One, World War Two, the Vietnam War, any war that we find about. I did do a war about the about the Trojan Army like a couple weeks ago, and that was a pretty interesting one too. Um, Now, yeah, the Canto Casino Chronicle was the first Romanian historical work to record. Well, yeah, I'm Jewish, but Hitler was very evil. I did not like Hitler at all, even though he was born before my time. Um, now it narrates the impalement of the old boyars of Targovish for the murder of his brother Dan. The chronicle added that Vlad had forced the young boyars and their wives and children to build something called the Ponari Castle. Um, the legend of the Ponari Castle was mentioned in 1747 by a guy named Neophyt I, who was a metropolitan of Ungro, Wakalia, who complemented it with the story of Master Roll Manoli, walled in his bride to prevent the crumbling of the walls of the castle during the building project. Um, maybe I don't know for sure. I don't do my streams every day. I do them once a week. I do my live streams once a week. I don't know. I try not to do too many all at once because I got to do my research and everything before I put out all the videos. Um, Now, let's see, where was that? Okay, in the early 20th century, Constantine Radu Luscu Koden, a teacher in Muscle County, where the castle was built, had published a local legend about Vlad's letter of grants written on rabbit skin from the villagers who had helped him to escape from Panari Castle to Transylvania during the Ottoman invasion of Wakalia. Um, in other villages in the region, the donation is attributed to the legendary Radu Negro. Um, Radulescu Koden recorded further local legends, some of which are also known from the German and Slavic stories about Vlad, um, suggesting that the latter stories preserved oral tradition. Now, for instance, the tales about the burning of the lazy, the poor, and the lame at Vlad's order, and the execution of the woman who had made her husband too short a skirt, can also be found among the German and Slavic anecdotes. The peasants telling the tales knew that Vlad's sobriquet was connected to the frequent impalements during his reign, but they also said only such cruel acts would secure public order in Wakalia. Um, most Romanian artists have regarded Vlad as just a ruler and a realistic tyrant who punished criminals and executed unpatriotic boyars to strengthen the central government. Um, Now, Ion Bude Delanu had wrote the first Romanian epic poem focused on Vlad. Delanu's Gypsy epic, which was published only once in 1875, almost a century after its composition, presented Vlad as a hero fighting against the boyars, Ottomans, or vampires, and other evil spirits at the head of an army of gypsies and angels. Um, the poet Dmitri Bolantonelu emphasized Vlad's triumphs in his battles of the Romanians in the middle of the 19th century. Now he regarded Vlad as a reformer whose acts of violence were necessary to prevent the deposition of the boyars. One of the greatest Romanian poets, Mihai Eminescu, dedicated a historic ballad, basically the third letter to the valiant princes of Wakalia, including Ben. He urges Vlad to return from the grave and to annihilate the enemies of the Romanian nation. Um, um, and basically, this is the letter that was written. You must come home, O Dread Impaler. Confound them to your care, split them into two partitions. Here the fools, the rascals here, shove them into two enclosures from the broad daylight, and then set fire to the prison and the lunatic asylum. In the early 1860s, the painter Theodore Aman had depicted the meeting of Vlad and the Ottoman envoy, showing the envoy's fear of the Wakalian ruler. Now, since the middle of the 19th century, Romanian historians have treated Vlad as one of the greatest Romanian rulers, emphasizing his fight for the independence of the Romanian land. Even Vlad III's acts of cruelty were often represented as rational acts serving national interest. But Alexandru Xenopol was one of the first historians to emphasize that Vlad could only stop the internal fights of the boyar parties. And through his acts of terror, Constantine C. Giorescu remarked, the tortures and executions which Vlad ordered were not a caprice, but they always had a reason, and very often a reason of state. Ion Bogdan was one of the few Romanian historians who did not accept this heroic image. Now, in his work, published in 1896, Vlad Tepes and the German and Russian narratives, he concluded that the Romanians should be ashamed of Vlad instead of presenting him as a model of courage and patriotism. But according to an opinion poll conducted in 1999, 4% of the participants chose Vlad the Impaler as one of the most important historical personalities who have influenced the destiny of the Romanians for the better. Now the stories about Vlad made him the best known medieval ruler of the Romanian lands in Europe. However, the Bram Stoker's book Dracula, which was published in 1897, was the first book to make a connection between Dracula and vampirism. Stoker had his attention drawn to the blood-sucking vampires of Romanian folklore by Emily Gerard's article about Transylvanian superstitions published in 1885. His limited knowledge about the medieval history of Wakalia came from William Wilkinson's book entitled Accounts of the Principalities of Wakalia and Moldavia, with political observations relative to them, published in 1820. Stoker apparently did not know much about Vlad the Impaler, but certainly not enough for us to say that Vlad was the inspiration for Count Dracula, according to Elizabeth Miller. Now, for instance, Stoker wrote that Dracula had been of Zakeli origin only because he knew about the Attila the Hun's destructive campaigns and the alleged Hunnic origin of the Zakels. I would like to actually put up Attila the Hun video too eventually down the line. I have to start taking notes about what videos I want to do. Now, Stoker's main source, Wilkinson, who accepted the reliability of the German stories, described Vlad as being wicked. Actually, Stoker's working papers for his book contained no references to the historical figure, but the name of the character being named in all drafts, but the later ones, Count Vampire. Consequently, Stoker borrowed the name and the scraps of miscellaneous information about the history of Wakalia when writing his book about Count Dracula. Now, Pope Pius's legate, Niccolo Modrusa, had painted the only extant description of Vlad when we had met in Buda. A copy of Vlad's portrait has been featured in the Monster Portrait Gallery in the Ambrose Castle of Innsbruck. Now, the picture depicts a strong, cruel, and somewhat tortured man with large, deep-set, dark green, and penetrating eyes, according to Florescu. Now, the color of Vlad's hair cannot be determined because Medusa mentions that Vlad was black-haired, while the portrait seems to show that he had fair hair, and the picture depicts Vlad with a large lower lip. Vlad's bad reputation in the German-speaking territories can be detected in a number of Renaissance paintings. He was portrayed among the witnesses of St. Andrew's martyrdom in a 15th century painting displayed in the Belvedere in Vienna. A figure similar to Vlad is one of the witnesses of Christ in the Calvary in the chapel of the St. Stephen's Cathedral in Vienna. Now, Vlad was not tall, but very stocky and strong, with a cold and terrible appearance, a strong and aquiline nose, swollen nostrils, a thin and reddish face in which the very long eyelashes framed large, wide open eyes, and the bushy black eyebrows made them appear threatening. His face and chin were shaven, but for a mustache. The swollen temples increased the bulk of his head, but a bull's neck connected with his head, from which black curly locks hung on his wide-shouldered person. And that's basically as much as we can get today. Next week, we'll have another video up. I try not to do my live streams too much. I will name off some videos that I'm probably going to get to next week. I'm going to get to at least one each week, and let me know which one you guys want me to do for next week. So the pages I have open for the videos for next week are Joan of Arc, St. Patrick, let's close that one out there. Santa Claus, Jesus, God, the country Egypt, because Egypt has a lot of fascinating history. Let's go up here. The Persian Empire, or the Achaemenid Empire. Those are the videos. So I will repeat it again, so you guys heard me right. Joan of Arc, St. Patrick, Santa Claus, Jesus, God, Egypt, the Persian Empire, or the Achaemenid Empire. If you guys are interested in any of those videos, let me know which video you want me to get to next week, and we will get to them. I'm only doing one live stream video a week because I'm trying to get to know my audience. But but this is about the end of the video. So if you like the video, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Rusty the King. Make sure to hit like and subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this. And if you want to support my work even further, you can donate to my Patreon link, which you can find in the about section of YouTube. But also, you can leave a comment, let me know what you guys thought about the video, and we'll go from there. And I hope you guys enjoyed.